Hello and welcome to another episode of Popscast, where we talk about arts, music, and feature life performances. We have today with us, some could say, or one could say, the best wind quintet in the entire world. So I'm gonna go through reverse score order, and we have Chris Raymond on bassoon.
Hello, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
And then Jancy Philippus on horn.
Hey, Daniel.
You guys don't have to all say hey, it's okay. And then, okay, score order. Karen DeBush on clarinet.
Yep.
And then Evan Tamman on oboe.
Evan Tamman.
And did I say it wrong?
No.
Oh, good. Okay.
I was just saying my name.
Remind yourself. Tori Lupinek on flute.
Hey.
And you guys form, I guess, the ad hoc Urbana Pops Orchestra Wind Quintet. And you just came off a recital a few weeks ago, and it turns out you guys are getting gigs already, which is kind of neat. So I got some stuff here to talk about today. We're going to play a couple of pieces. And so we're going to start here. Chris, I'm going to start with you. And I assume that someone somewhere had the brilliant idea to put these particular instruments together in this order and play concerts. So why don't you talk to me a little bit about old school wind quintets?
So kind of the development of the wind quintet kind of followed the tail end of the development of the more modern orchestra, where originally when it just started with strings, eventually they started integrating horn and oboe, and then eventually they added bassoon, and then the clarinet and the flute. Well, what ended up just basically happening is, since we had all these five instruments together already playing in the orchestra, it just ended up kind of just coming together as a great way of forming and being able to perform wind chamber music, basically.
So did you guys, was your first wind quintet experience, was that like when you got to college, or did you guys play in quintets when you were in high school? I would assume it's a pretty difficult thing to do as a younger musician, to keep it together and everything. So you're all shaking your head now. So.
Yeah, I think mine was actually in college.
Mm-hmm.
Mine was in high school.
Mine was also in high school. Mine as well. Actually. Yeah.
Gotcha.
They're sort of difficult to make sound good.
Yeah.
I think because
Because there's an oboe.
because it's an oboe, and because I think with the woodwind quintet especially, you have so many different timbres as compared to a brass quintet, where everything naturally sort of syncs better together. We have lots of different colors, so I think people have to be really sensitive in woodwind quintet. So I don't think you see too many really young players.
There's not a
playing
lot
them.
written for young players.
Sure.
No.
Yeah. Speaking of balance, I only see French horn players in packs to protect each other, and I don't usually see one, let alone one with a bunch of wind players. And I assume that balancing a brass instrument with just quieter instruments is pretty difficult. How do you guys, say, Jancy, how do you balance that out?
Oh, I just try and keep my ears open, and I usually start by cutting my dynamic level probably down to about 50 or 60% of what my normal dynamic level is, and then I'll adjust from there. Usually I kind of gauge my dynamics off the bassoonist. We're lucky to have a really solid bassoon player in this group, so I actually get to play pretty comfortably a lot in this group. But since Chris is sort of our foundation, he's the bass, he's the bassoon, I tend to balance down to him. But there are moments, like in the Paul Simon suite, that you'll hear in just a moment, where like Karen and Tori will have the melody and I'm just holding a note and pretty much my strongest register in terms of dynamics. And I have to play pretty soft, and it's marked mezzo piano, and I actually feel like I'm playing more like a pianissimo. So for horn players, I think it's just a matter of learning to have really big ears and listen and balance, and always be mindful of the other players. But at the same token, whenever we need to kick our volume to 11, that's a Spinal Tap reference. I hope everyone got that.
All right, let's go to 11.
Whenever we need to go to 11, like you'll hear in the Ibert, there are some moments where I do open up my sound and I can make the group really loud, because I do have that volume knob and that capability to be pretty loud. So it actually, wind quintet for horn players is really fun, because we get to play with a lot of different colors, a lot of different dynamics, and it's probably the one activity, even more so than brass quintet, I think, that challenges my ears and my intonation and my ability to go to my extremes, which we always like to do as musicians, I
Sure,
think.
yeah. And you mentioned having a great bassoonist, and we were just talking like 4 seconds ago about how this is a difficult ensemble to put together as younger players. And I would assume that one of the problems is kind of that there's a flute and there's a clarinet player in every middle school and high school band in the country, and there are lots of horn players, but bassoon and oboe, double reed instruments, aren't quite some band directors' like comfort zone to teach. So I would assume that that's one of the reasons why you have trouble, I guess, getting younger players to play in a wind quintet. So Karen, you're, of course, speaking of students, you're the band director or band in middle school, and we were just having this discussion, I think, at the recital about how hard it is to get students.
It is, but it can happen.
Right. The thing that I always enjoy noticing when I play with you and when we do concerts and everything is that you. Let me preface this. When I was in school, there was a common mantra, and it kind of bothered me that if you were a music ed major, that you didn't have to practice your instrument as much, or that you didn't have to play as much. And the thing that I love so much about doing gigs with you is that you're a performing teacher that puts in the work. So what's it? I mean, how do you go about that? Just the whole idea of being a good musical model.
Well, I 100% agree with that. I've never been a person who's bought into because I'm a music ed major, I shouldn't be a great musician, because that's my job to portray that to my young musicians, my young students. And if they don't know that I have standards, why would I expect them to have them?
Sure.
So, I tend to be kind of picky, and I tend to push them to their limits, and I do the same for myself. Practicing is hard as a teacher, and I need motivators to do it, just like my students do. But I'm really big into things like solo and ensemble to give my students these experiences.
To perform,
Yeah.
sure, yeah. So you, if I'm right, Tori, Evan, and Jancy and Chris, you guys are students all at the University of Illinois.
Yes. I am not.
Oh.
I'm ABD, so I finished my doctoral coursework in 2013, I'm ashamed to say, but I haven't finished my dissertation, so.
Well, but you guys were all there at some point. And then Karen's like a real
Actually,
adult.
I was from the university.
Yeah.
I was doing a DMA there.
Sure. So you guys were performance majors?
Yes.
All of you? I think that's the interesting thing about this kind of discussion too, is that Karen, your first degree was in music ed, and
Right.
your second degree was in performance, I think.
But my mantra was, I will teach over my dead body.
Right. Yeah. And the thing I think is really neat is that even as performance majors, I was just talking about this to one of the other podcasts we did about how you can be a performance major, but eventually your feet are going to go into the education pool anyway, in one way or another. So you guys, do you guys have active students now? Do you guys have studios? That's really different, obviously, from teaching in a classroom. So what are some of the difficulties having like private students as opposed to like having a whole classroom of kids? Actually, it might be even easier now that I'm listening to myself say that, having fewer kids.
There are different challenges, and I actually also have a degree in music ed. My first degree is in music ed. I think with a classroom of students, it's sort of curricular. They're there, they sign up for the class, they have to be there. By state law, you have to take attendance. So they have to be in that setting. They've signed up for that. I guess a lot of arts classes are extracurricular, so they're not considered part of the academic core. I know that's different from state to state, but with private lessons, it's something that they're tagging on in addition to everything else that they're doing. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, with teaching private lessons is kids these days are really busy. They're interested in a lot of things.
Yeah.
And you have to, through the 30 minutes to an hour you see them a week, convince them that they are worth carving out some practice time. Yeah. And I think, in classes you have certain structures through the school system, like grading, that maybe help motivate that a little bit. But in private lessons, you have to rely on yourself as a teacher and your curriculum and your passion for the music to get the students to practice on a week-to-week basis. And that kind of keeps me on my toes And I think one of the things also is by telling my students, I'm practicing, I'm performing too. Yeah, I had a concert this weekend too. They're hearing that I'm performing and doing these things right alongside with them. So those are a couple differences.
I've noticed that at the recital that you guys did a few weeks ago, that all of you are at one point had some kind of spiel that you gave about the piece that you were playing, or at least most of you did, and it was really engaging to watch you guys talk about the music and why you like it. How do you go about making an audience fall in love with the music as much as you're in love with it?
I think as performers, part of our job is to educate our audiences, to help them understand what we're playing, why it's important to us, why it's appealing to us, and a little bit of background. Even as a public school band director, I really want my students to be more knowledgeable about what's inside the music, beyond the notes and the rhythms, because that makes them take interest.
Do you guys think that?
I think too, you have to be having like an emotional experience when you play something in order to get people to have an emotional experience with you.
Sure.
So if you're just playing the notes, no one in the audience will be very moved by it, I think.
Do you think that people don't care about classical music anymore?
I don't believe that at all.
No.
It's a conversation I have, I guess. The Pops Orchestra, for example, UPO, we try to bring people in, and we're always trying to figure out how to get people to realize that they're already in love with classical music. They just don't really know it, because people listen to a lot of film scores and everything, and it's just kind of naturally, maybe not stylistically, but it's kind of I guess a gateway drug to more classical music. So Tori, you guys don't benefit from a brilliant conductor in rehearsal.
No, unfortunately not. No.
So how do you're first in score order, so does that make you the boss, or is this more of a collaboration?
I think that if you ask particular flute players, they might say, yes, I'm the boss.
That
and that has
like a
very
read.
much to do with a type A personality that often finds its way into flute players, especially young flute players. But no, just because top of the score order doesn't necessarily mean that I'm the person running the rehearsals. I think that a lot of times some of the quote-unquote conducting often drops down to the flutist because of the very nature of our instrument. I'm holding up my instrument like people can see it.
Yeah, we'll imagine it. It's okay.
Just because it sticks out of the side of my body horizontally, it's the most visually apparent instrument that the other musicians can see above the music stands. Not that people can't see the bassoon, but the bassoon is a little more ergonomically difficult to execute.
This is a difficult
Yeah,
instrument.
it's just a different kind of instrument to have to move around. But some of the quote-unquote conducting eventually falls to the flutist, but also all of the other players. We have to take on the role of conducting ourselves. And I think that one of my personal favorite parts of playing in a chamber music group is that as performers, we now have control over our own musical interpretation of the piece that we are playing. Whereas when you're playing in a large ensemble like an orchestra or a big wind band, you're kind of always at the mercy of the conductor. You can make some small musical decisions for yourself and your section, perhaps, but the large-scale musical ideas usually always come from the person waving their arms at the top of the group.
Sure.
And I think that having that kind of creative outlet in a small chamber group setting like this is really what makes it the most fun.
Sure. What's the decision-making process like? Because sometimes something just doesn't, it doesn't sound good. Or so who's the guy or the girl that's kind of that didn't sound very good? Or how do you guys delegate?
so.
I think it's a pretty open forum usually.
So you all agree that something
Yeah, we'll
sounds
get done
okay.
playing, and then Karen will say something, Jancy will say something, I'll say something.
If not, we'll just rock, paper, scissors it out. No. I think one cool thing about chamber music, it's kind of the closest that you'll come to mind reading, and it goes back to that idea of listening. A lot of times in a rehearsal, we'll play through something, and from the beginning of a movement to the end of the movement, you'll hear changes that are happening just because the group is listening to each other. Whether we're listening down to Chris for the balance or up to Tori for the articulation, or if Evan has the melody, we're always listening and kind of making changes on the spot, and we're not even saying anything. And I think that's one of the strongest benefits of playing chamber music, is that it kind of really magnifies these non-verbal communication skills and sort of heightened awareness of other people and other people's musical viewpoints. So in a lot of ways, like musical empathy, I guess. A lot of decision making isn't even said verbal. It's just we're listening and kind of picking up on what each other's putting down.
And a lot of it is just being aware of what's going on around you and knowing how you fit into what's going on. And that's really important.
Yeah, it's one of the things I noticed. You guys were rehearsing a little bit earlier, and it's I guess one of the things that's really fun about the music you play, obviously, is the orchestration can be different depending on what part it is, and it's I think that guides a lot of what you were just saying. And speaking of pieces we're going to play, I think you guys brought some music with you to play, and I think probably both of them were on the recital that you
Yes,
played.
yes, they were.
Yeah, and I'm really excited actually about both of them. So Evan, why don't you tell us a little bit about the first
Yeah,
piece?
so the first piece is a little bit of pop music, an arrangement by Marcia Schweitzer, by Paul Simon, Sound of Silence, which was on Simon and Garfunkel's debut album, which was a complete flop in 1964, and actually led to the duo breaking up for a while. I guess Art Garfunkel went back to Columbia to study, and Paul Simon went to England for a while. But then people started playing it on the radio, and it became popular, and they got back together. And so this is sort of what brought the band back together.
So the Wind Quintet version is, let's try to get that
Yeah,
like a little bit
we're
more mainstream. I think people will. All right, well, let's hear it. So I think it would be easy for someone to assume that playing like a pop tune like that without words could be kind of dangerous to lose like some of the meaning. And I think what's so cool about that is that the entire time listening to it, I don't really feel like I necessarily need the words because of how many different colors there are. It's a really fast moving arrangement, and I was a little surprised at how technical it was too with some of these like crazy flute and bassoon things. It's really neat. It sounded really good. So let's do one more.
Great.
Let's do another one. And I think you guys got some Ibert.
Yes, we're going to do the first two movements of the three short pieces by Jacques Ibert. And if you thought the last one was colorful, this is even more so.
All right.
So I hope you enjoy it.
I'd be remiss to not mention that you guys are all performers of the Urbana Pops, where you commonly find yourself in a coaching situation with other students. And so the recital that you guys did was a while ago. However, if you wanted to hear more of them, go to youtube.com/UrbanaPops, and there's a great video of Jancy's horn solo on Princess Leia's theme. We did some music from Prince of Egypt that Karen sounds really great on. Chris, you never hear bassoon in anything, so yeah. And there are actually actually speaking of bassoon and Princess Leia's theme, the oboe, flute, and bassoon parts, all of those are really, really neat. So thank you guys so much for being here.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Dave.
Check out our website, urbanapops.org, where you can always find the most recent episode of the UPO Popscast, as well as information about the orchestra and upcoming performances and events. You can also like us on Facebook at facebook.com/UrbanaPops, where there are pictures and behind-the-scenes footage of this episode. We'd like to give a special thanks to the Community Center for the Arts for providing studio space. You can read more about C4A at c-4a.org. The UPO Popscast is produced and engineered by Chris Peterson, and I am Daniel Sutherland. From all of us here at the Urbana Pops Orchestra, thank you for listening. Be sure to leave us a like, comment, and tell us your favorite part of today's episode, and hit that subscribe button, and we will see you next time.